Hello Steelers, and welcome to this video in which I'll be going through the stages of building and painting this La Belle Alliance building from Sarissa. This is a 15mm MDF building and it came with a Wellington starter set for the Warlord Epic Napoleonic Waterloo range. I have made a video about a box opening of the set and you can find that elsewhere on this channel. I thought I'd like to add a little more to the basic kit, and it doesn't really involve a lot of work. You can skip these parts if you like, but just follow the painting otherwise and it'll still turn out okay. I will put a list of all the paints and materials that I use in the description down below. La Belle Alliance was the legendary meeting place for Wellington and Blucher after the Battle of Waterloo was over on the evening of the 18th of June 1815, and it signified the end of Napoleon's attempts to seize power in Europe once again. This Sarissa kit comes a single sheet of laser cut etched MDF. It also comes with an instruction sheet with some information on about how to build the building and also a little bit more. I popped the pieces out of their sprues and I ensured I knew what I was looking at before dry fitting some of the building. Also, I took this opportunity to clean off the little nubs from the sprue with a sharp craft knife. I used undiluted PVA glue to fix the basic shell of the building together, and then fix that to the base, which will hold all the walls in place. Using a brush, I also went over all the joints with more PVA just to ensure a good tight bond around the MDF pieces. Then I turned my attention to the chimneys, and I glued the small rectangular pieces to either side of the roof joists. Again, this was just with PVA glue. Then I left everything to dry before moving on, leaving it to dry overnight. Then, with the walls completely dry, I added a small amount of polyfiller to the joints of the PVA. For those of an American extraction, this is called spackle. These joints are quite obvious due to the MDF model processors, so I wanted to try to disguise them a little, and this works perfectly. Just add the filler to the corners and the joints, and then wipe off the excess with your finger. Just try not to get any filler in the detail of the windows or the doorways or the brickwork if possible. I put the building aside to dry overnight again, and I turned my attention back to the roof. Now the kit comes with an engraved roof, which is fine, but I wanted to add something a little bit more realistic. So I bought a sheet of 1/100th scale ridged plasticard roofing tiles from eBay. Again, I'll put a link in the description down below. These are for model railways, but they're perfect for this build. I carefully lined up the tiles and glued the roof piece down to the plasticard, and then trimmed it down to size using a sharp knife. I also ensured that I cut out the areas for the chimney stacks, but I didn't cut out the holes for the roof to join the wall, because this will be covered by the plasticard anyway. And then I did this for both sides of the roof. Then I smoothed down the edges of the chimneys where the separate pieces joined, just to get rid of the line of the join, and I started putting the roof together with the roof joists. For this, you can use PVA glue as before, or super glue as I did here. Makes no difference really. I did the same roof technique for the end of the building outhouse roof, but remembered to leave a little extra on one end to butt up against the end wall and not to leave a small gap. I also realised at this point that there was a gap where the two roof parts met due to the MDF and how it is constructed, so I filled this in with a single line of roof tiles between the chimneys using superglue, and I cursed myself for not being more attentive in the first place. Now the building comes on its own base and this is fine, but I wanted to add a little bit more here as well. Now you could go mad and make a little yard and garden, and I've done this in the past with other buildings, but not for this one as I wanted to keep it simple. I cut a piece of 2mm thick plasticard to a rectangle that was just slightly larger than the building footprint, and I clipped off the sharp edges and rounded them off with a file. This was to blend the base into the tabletop a little bit. Then I took a sheet of embossed plasticard with a stone pattern on it, and I cut this to roughly the right size, and using plastic cement, glued the two pieces together. When this had dried, I trimmed and embossed the plasticard so it fitted to the piece below. And that was the building part over, so it was now time to start painting the model. I had a look at photos online and saw that from old paintings the building was whitewashed with a red roof tile. This was good enough for me. Using a medium-sized brush, I painted white Vallejo straight onto the MDF without a primer. I worked in a circular motion and tried not to be too rigid in the painting. Using this technique, and as the paint soaks into the MDF, gives it a very basic weathering look. I also made sure to paint the roof ridges and the end wall that will be seen once the roof is on. As the wall paint dried, I painted the stone floor in Vallejo stone grey with another largish brush, just getting quick coverage and ensuring that all the nooks and crannies were filled in. You might want to go over this twice just to ensure that you get the coverage. The roof was next, and I painted this in Deco Arts Heritage Brick Red. This is a craft paint, so it doesn't stick to the plastic too well, but you can do it by making a couple of passes with the paint. I didn't film it, but I painted the interior in Vallejo black, and then I turned my attention to the details, including the doors of the farmhouse, which I painted in German uniform. Again, this is by Vallejo. However, any colour will do, to be honest, just use whatever you like here. I used a small brush and I ensured that I didn't go over the lines and the details on the wall. However, I could always repair any overspill just by repainting in white. I then painted the brickwork across the base of the building with German grey by Vallejo. Once again, I was just trying to be neat and use a small brush so I don't get this on the walls. Finally, I didn't film it, but I did paint the MDF base of the building just in stone grey again. I left the building paint to dry and I went back to the now dried roof. Using a big soft brush, I dry brushed German orange by Vallejo over the roof tiles to pick out the edges. Simply wipe off excess paint onto an old cloth or kitchen towel and brush lightly across the grain of the tiles to get the effect. Don't worry, if you get it wrong, just repaint the red and try it again. Back to the base, and I washed this in Citadel's Agrax Earthshade using a big brush. I made sure that the base is entirely covered and that the wash got into all the lines of the stonework, and then I let this dry overnight just to ensure it is completely set. When that was dry, I used stone grey again just to dry brush across the base. This is going to pick out all the highlights while also giving some tonal variation to the stonework. Whilst I was doing this, I lightly dry brushed the base of the building and also the brickwork running around the bottom with the same stone grey. You'll notice that I had also painted the edges of the MDF in black under the roof. This was just to give them an impression of guttering and flashing. I then superglued the building to the plasticard base, ensuring that this was lined up properly. When the glue was dry, I went outside and sprayed the model in matte varnish. Now you could stop here if you wanted, but I wanted to add more weathering, so this is why I protected it at this point. Weathering is really entirely up to you as to how far you go, but you can do much more than I did here. But I was also wanting this to be a quick and easy guide to making this building and to get it on the table, so I only did one stage of weathering. But, in my opinion, this is probably the most important. I used Flurry Wash Grime, and I applied it to the entire building with a big brush. This is a clay wash used by aircraft modelers, and it will reactivate if wiped away with a damp cloth. I used the cloth to draw off the wash, but ensured that it looks like streaks of grime and rain weathering running down the roof and walls. It is a simple but very effective way of weathering buildings quickly. I didn't film it, but once the wiped off wash had dried, I sprayed the model once more in matte varnish just to complete it. However, I wasn't finished there. I wanted to add a little bit of greenery to the base just to add a bit of colour and interest beyond the square white walls. And for this, I used clump foliage. I dipped this into undiluted PVA glue and then pressed it into shapes where I wanted it to go. This is a very messy process, but the PVA will dry rock hard and keep the greenery in place if you ensure that the foliage is absolutely soaked in the glue. It'll take a couple of days to dry properly, but I promise you it will be rock hard. I also added a couple of grass tufts, but again, I didn't film that. And then there we have it, the finished farmhouse. Although this is based on a specific building, it is pretty typical of the buildings across Belgium in the early 19th century. This would even work up to modern times, as the actual building is still standing today. I deliberately kept this simple, but I could have added a backyard using 3D printed fences and other details like vegetable plots, but I just wanted to show you a very simple way of elevating this model beyond the basic MDF kit. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If so, please leave a comment and a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe, and I'll see you in the next Storm of Steel video.